The laughter froze me in place. My hand tightened on the banister as I heard her voice drift down the stairs, playful and teasing. Then, a man's voice joined hers, deep and confident, laced with laughter. I took a deep breath, every muscle in my body tense. I wasn't confused about what I was hearing. After 22 years of marriage, I knew my wife's voice better than anyone. And I knew exactly what was happening upstairs. Part of me wanted to charge up there, throw the door open, and drag the bastard out by the collar. It would have been satisfying, for sure. But as my pulse slowed and my mind cleared, I realized something, and that's exactly what they'd expect. No. If they thought I was the type of man to lose control and give them a scene, they were dead wrong. I turned away from the stairs and walked back to the kitchen. My boots echoed off the hardwood floors, each step deliberate, controlled. Sitting at the table, I stared at the family photo on the wall, Emily and me at Myrtle Beach last summer, smiling like nothing could ever go wrong. That picture wasn't worth a damn now. I wasn't going to scream, cry, or let them see me sweat. No, I was going to be smarter than that. Let them think they've gotten away with it. Let them laugh while they can. Because when I make my move, they won't even see it coming. I didn't sleep that night. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily above me. Emily was fast asleep beside me, her breathing steady, peaceful. She had no idea I knew. Not yet. Every moment of the evening replayed in my mind, the laughter, the voices, the shadows on the walls. I didn't know who the man was, but I had no doubt that this wasn't the first time they'd been together. People don't get that comfortable overnight. I needed to be sure. Confronting her now would get me nothing but denials and crocodile tears. I had to know the truth, every ugly, disgusting detail. The next morning, I left the house early, pretending I had errands to run. In reality, I was heading to the local electronics store. By 8 a.m., I was standing in front of a glass case filled with gadgets, cameras disguised as picture frames, GPS trackers, keyloggers. I wasn't sure if I felt more like a private detective or a man losing his mind. "Can I help you find something?" The young clerk looked up from his phone, his expression bored. "Yeah," I said, forcing a friendly smile. "Looking for some home security gear. My neighborhood's had some break-ins recently." It was a half-lie, but he didn't care enough to ask questions. Within 20 minutes, I walked out with everything I needed. By the time Emily got home from her Saturday yoga class, I had already installed a small camera in our bedroom and slipped a GPS tracker into her car. I hated that it had come to this. But every time I thought about her voice, laughing with another man, it felt like fire spreading through my chest. I wasn't going to sit back and let her make a fool out of me. The next few days were torture. Emily acted like nothing had changed, cooking dinner, asking about my day, even sitting beside me on the couch to watch TV. But I knew better. On Monday night, I got my first clue. I was in the garage, tinkering with my tools, when my phone buzzed. It was the GPS tracker. Emily's car was parked somewhere it shouldn't have been, an apartment complex across town. I pulled up the camera feed from our bedroom. The view wasn't perfect, but it showed enough. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just an empty room. But then the door opened. There he was. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy confidence in the way he moved. He didn't look like a stranger to this house. My house. I watched as Emily led him into the room. They kissed, nothing overly passionate, but enough to make my blood boil. She laughed at something he said, that same laugh I'd heard just days ago. I clenched my fists so tightly I thought I might crush my phone. This wasn't just a fling. This was familiarity. Comfort. But I didn't smash the phone. I didn't scream or cry. I just stood there, staring at the screen, letting the anger build inside me like a storm. When the two of them finally left the room, I turned off the feed and sat in silence. My heart was pounding, my breath shaky. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. Over the next few days, I started gathering more evidence. Texts. Calls. GPS logs. Every move Emily made, I tracked it. I wasn't just preparing to confront her, I was preparing to destroy her. And I wasn't going to stop at her. That bastard who thought he could walk into my home and take what was mine? He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to fall apart. For now, I played the role of the clueless husband. I smiled at Emily's jokes, nodded along to her stories, and even kissed her goodnight. But inside, I was already plotting my revenge. In the days that followed, my anger didn't fade, it sharpened. I didn't waste time drowning in self-pity. Instead, I focused all that rage into planning. If Emily and her lover thought they could betray me without consequences, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I started with small steps, careful not to raise suspicion. Every morning, I checked the GPS tracker on Emily's car before she left for work. She had a predictable routine, a quick stop at Starbucks on her way to the office, lunch with her friends, then home by 5:30. At least, that's what she wanted me to think. On Wednesday, the tracker showed a detour. Her car parked for over an hour at the same apartment complex I'd seen on Monday night. She was getting bolder, or maybe she thought I was too oblivious to notice. I wasn't. That evening, I went through the camera footage from our bedroom. She hadn't brought him back to the house since the last time I'd caught them. I guessed the apartment was their new meeting spot. Good. The less I had to see them defile my home, the better. But knowing where wasn't enough. I needed leverage. Something undeniable. By Friday, I had a plan. The first part of it was simple, a get to know my enemy. Who was this man? He looked like someone with too much confidence for his own good. Broad shoulders, designer suits, and a cocky grin that probably charmed Emily right out of her wedding ring. Using the license plate from the footage, I ran his car through an online registry. His name was Brad Harrison, a regional sales director for a large tech company in Atlanta. Married, 2 kids, and living in a gated community just outside the city. I couldn't help but laugh when I read that. He was playing house with Emily while pretending to be a family man at home. I spent hours digging into his background, social media profiles, public records, anything I could get my hands on. Brad was the kind of guy who posted vacation pictures from Cabo while his company announced layoffs. His LinkedIn bragged about record-breaking sales, but I found several lawsuits against his firm, accusing them of shady business practices. Perfect. By Sunday, I had what I needed to begin phase 2 of my plan. I didn't confront Emily. Not yet. She'd be expecting me to lose my cool, to shout and accuse her. No, I was going to play the long game. At breakfast, she sipped her coffee like nothing was wrong, scrolling through her phone as if her life weren't about to implode. "You okay?" she asked casually, glancing up at me. I smiled. Of course. Just thinking about some changes we need to make around here. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't press. She went back to her phone, and I went back to planning. Later that afternoon, I visited an old friend, Mark. He ran a small private investigation firm downtown, and we'd played softball together for years. Mark owed me a favor. When I told him what I needed, his expression turned serious. "You sure about this, Jack?" "Dead sure." Mark nodded, leaning back in his chair. "It'll take a few days, but I'll get you everything you need. The guy's not gonna see it coming." "That's the point," I said, shaking his hand. By the time I left his office, I felt more in control than I had in weeks. The pieces were falling into place. Emily didn't know it, Brad didn't know it, but they were both about to learn what happens when you stab a man in the back. By the following week, I had a clear picture of Brad Harrison's life. His cushy job, his perfect family, the image he worked so hard to maintain, it all made him the ideal target. A man like that had everything to lose, and I was about to take it all. But to make this work, I needed more than just knowledge. I needed leverage. Mark, the private investigator, delivered exactly what I needed on Thursday morning. He handed me a thick folder as we sat in the corner of a quiet diner downtown. "Here it is," he said, sliding it across the table. "Financials, side deals, even some interesting texts. The guy's as dirty as they come." I flipped through the documents, my stomach tightening with satisfaction. Brad's company was involved in several questionable contracts, and there were whispers of embezzlement. Even better, there were texts between him and Emily, enough to prove the affair beyond any doubt. "This is perfect," I said, closing the folder. Mark leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "So, what's the next step?" "Patience," I replied, a thin smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "First, I'll let them feel safe. Then, I'll make my move." That afternoon, I began setting the pieces in motion. Step 1 is secure my assets. I contacted my attorney and quietly began shifting funds into a private account Emily couldn't access. I didn't care how much she got in the divorce, and she wasn't touching my hard-earned money. Step 2, expose Brad. I sent an anonymous email to the compliance department at his company, attaching a few key pieces of evidence from Mark's folder. Nothing too heavy yet, just enough to plant the seed of doubt. A little scandal could go a long way. Step 3, gather more proof. I installed a second camera in the garage and another in the living room. If Emily brought Brad back to the house again, I wanted to catch every second of it. By Friday night, everything was set. Emily left the house around 7 p.m., claiming she was meeting friends for dinner. I already knew where she was going. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I checked the GPS tracker on her car. Sure enough, she was headed to Brad's apartment. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on the final part of my plan and making sure the fallout would be public. Using a burner phone, I began drafting a series of emails. The first was addressed to Brad's wife. It was simple, direct, and came with a few choice screenshots of text messages between him and Emily. The second email was for Brad's boss, evidence of his unethical deals, tied neatly with a bow. And the third? That one was for Emily. She wouldn't get hers until the very end, after everything else came crashing down. When Emily came home later that night, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and went upstairs to shower. I stayed in the kitchen, sipping a beer and staring at the emails on my laptop. They weren't sent yet, but they would be soon. For now, I had to play my role. The clueless husband. The man too blind to see what was happening right under his nose. But not for much longer. The morning felt colder than it should have for late October in Atlanta. Standing on my front porch, I watched the neighborhood wake up, the joggers, the dog walkers, the usual morning crowd. I held my coffee cup a little tighter, trying to focus on the quiet routine around me. But inside, I wasn't calm at all. Today was the day. Emily had already left for work. She kissed me on the cheek like she always did, humming her favorite song as she grabbed her purse and car keys. Watching her go, you'd never guess her life was about to take a very sharp turn. After she pulled out of the driveway, I went back inside and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. The email I had spent the last week crafting was open on the screen. My finger hovered over the mouse for just a moment before I clicked send. Subject: urgent compliance concern. Dear Sir or Madam, I'm bringing this to your attention because I believe it's in the best interest of your company. The attached documents detail questionable activities involving Brad Harrison that may require immediate review. Sincerely, a concerned party. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. It was done. The documents I'd sent included just enough evidence to raise red flags, financial discrepancies, shady contracts, and a few emails Mark had dug up that hinted at some very unethical deals. I didn't give them everything. Not yet. This was just the opening move. By noon, I got the first update from Mark. He'd planted someone inside Brad's company, a junior accountant who owed him a favor, and word was already spreading. The compliance team had been alerted, and an investigation was underway. Sitting in my office, I scrolled through Brad's social media. His morning post, one of those motivational quotes about grinding harder than the competition, made me laugh. Brad had no idea his so-called grind was about to hit a wall. Around 3 p.m., I turned my attention to my second email. This one wasn't for his boss. It was for his wife. Subject: as something you deserve to know. Dear Mrs. Harrison, I regret having to send this, but I think you deserve the truth. Your husband, Brad, has been having an affair with my wife, Emily. I've attached some messages and photos that confirm their relationship. I'm sorry for any pain this may cause, but I felt it was right for you to know. Sincerely, a husband who knows. This email was personal, and I made sure the attachments were carefully chosen, a few texts where Brad called Emily his escape and a photo of them together at a coffee shop, sitting too close for comfort. It wasn't overly dramatic, but it didn't need to be. The evidence spoke for itself. I didn't expect a response, at least not right away. I knew this would take time to sink in, and I was fine with that. I wasn't in a rush. Emily came home a little later than usual that evening, saying traffic had been a nightmare. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened and asked if I wanted to order pizza for dinner. Sure, I said, keeping my tone casual. Anything you want. We ate in front of the TV, the same as we did most nights. She laughed at the sitcom we were watching, and for a moment, I wondered how someone could live with this level of dishonesty. But then I reminded myself that her lies wouldn't last much longer. The first domino had fallen. By the time the week was over, her perfect little world, and Brad's, would be nothing but rubble. The first signs of trouble came faster than I expected. By Monday morning, Brad's company had put him on administrative leave while they investigated the compliance concerns. I knew this because Mark's contact sent him a quick text. Harrison looks rattled. Word is he's out of the office for at least a week. They are digging through everything. It was only the beginning. I could imagine the scene, Brad sitting in his corner office, blinds drawn, sweating bullets as his boss grilled him about the discrepancies. But what gave me the most satisfaction was knowing this was just phase one. Emily, of course, had no idea. She went about her routine as if nothing had changed. She smiled when she handed me my coffee in the morning and hummed her way out the door. It was almost funny watching her live in blissful ignorance while her lover's world was already crumbling. That afternoon, I got another update, this time, from a completely unexpected source. I was in the garage, pretending to organize my tools, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't bother answering, but something told me this wasn't a telemarketer. Hello? Is this Jackson? A woman's voice, trembling slightly. Yes, I said cautiously. This is Rebecca Harrison. I believe you emailed me. The tone of her voice shifted from uncertain to sharp, like she'd spent the last 24 hours building up her courage. I need to know everything, she said. We met later that evening at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. She arrived first, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a steaming cup. Rebecca looked tired, her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, but she carried herself with quiet determination. Thank you for coming, I said as I sat down across from her. Don't thank me, she replied, her voice icy. Just tell me the truth. All of it. I didn't hold back. I told her everything, how I'd suspected Emily for weeks, how I'd caught them on camera, how I tracked her car to Brad's apartment. I even showed her some of the texts I'd uncovered. Rebecca stared at the screen, her jaw tightening with each new message. Finally, she set the phone down and exhaled slowly. I thought he might be cheating, she admitted. But with your wife? God, that's a new low. Her reaction surprised me. She wasn't angry or hysterical, she was calculating, just like me. What do you want to do? I asked. Rebecca looked me in the eye, her expression hard. Burn him to the ground. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of camaraderie with her. We were both victims of their lies, but now we were allies. Rebecca had resources I didn't, connections, influence, and she wasn't afraid to use them. I parked in the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, staring at the house. Emily's car was in the garage, the lights on in the living room. She was probably inside, sipping tea and watching one of her favorite shows, completely unaware of how much closer we were to her downfall. I walked inside, keeping my face neutral. "How was your day?" she asked, glancing up from the couch. "Same as always," I replied with a smile. "Dinner's in the oven," she said, turning her attention back to the TV. "Thanks," I said, heading to the kitchen. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another text from Rebecca. "Let's start with his reputation. I've got a contact at the Atlanta Journal. They'll love this story." I smiled to myself. Phase 2 was officially underway. By the middle of the week, the cracks in Brad's world had turned into fractures. Mark kept me updated as the investigation at Brad's company dug deeper. The compliance team had uncovered enough to warrant a full audit, and whispers of misconduct had begun spreading through the office. The man who'd strutted around as the golden boy of sales was now the subject of every whispered conversation in the break room. But the most satisfying update came from Rebecca. She hadn't wasted any time after our meeting. The contact she mentioned at the Atlanta Journal was more than interested in the story she had to share. They loved nothing more than a scandal involving a high-profile executive. The article was published Thursday morning. Regional sales director linked to questionable financial practices and alleged affair. The headline was bold, sitting at the top of the business section like a neon sign. The piece laid out everything: Brad's alleged involvement in shady contracts, the internal investigation at his company, and a veiled mention of personal misconduct. They didn't name Emily directly, but the details were enough for anyone paying attention to connect the dots. Rebecca sent me a screenshot of the article the moment it went live, along with a simple text. "It's starting." I spent the rest of the morning checking social media. The post Brad had made earlier that week, the one about grinding harder than the competition, was flooded with comments. Some were supportive, but most were sarcastic, mocking. One caught my attention: "And maybe grind harder on your ethics, Brad." I couldn't help but laugh. That night, I came home to Emily waiting for me in the kitchen. She was dressed up more than usual, wearing a tight black dress I hadn't seen in years. "You late," she said, smiling as she poured a glass of wine. "Got caught up with some work," I replied, setting my keys on the counter. She held out the glass to me. "Well, you here now. Come on, let's sit down." I made pasta. I followed her to the dining room, where 2 plates of spaghetti sat steaming on the table. Candles flickered between us, and soft jazz played from the speakers in the corner. It was all so staged. "What's the occasion?" I asked, swirling the wine in my glass. "Do I need an occasion to make a nice dinner for my husband?" she replied, batting her lashes. Her voice was sweet, but there was something forced about it. I let the question hang in the air as I took a bite of the pasta. It was good, her cooking usually was, but the effort she'd put into tonight felt like guilt wrapped in a ribbon. After dinner, I went to my office under the pretense of catching up on emails. In reality, I was checking the latest fallout. Brad's company had released a statement that afternoon, confirming the investigation but denying any conclusions. It was corporate PR at its finest, vague, non-committal, and designed to buy time. But the damage was already done. Rebecca texted me again, this time with a photo of Brad walking into their house with his head down. Her caption read, "First time he's been home before 7 months. I wonder why." I chuckled, imagining the tension simmering in their home. But I wasn't done yet. The next phase of my plan was personal, and it was for Emily. The first step was planting doubt. She hadn't noticed the small changes I'd made around the house, moving her phone charger to a different outlet, leaving her favorite coffee mug in the wrong cabinet. Small things. Subtle things. Enough to make her wonder if she was losing track of details. Then came the notes. It started with one on her vanity mirror. "Does he know?" Another appeared on the dashboard of her car the next morning. "They always find out." Her reaction was exactly what I hoped for. That evening, I noticed her pacing in the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. When I walked in, she jumped. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Yeah," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." "Long day?" She nodded, avoiding my eyes. Something like that. I knew the pressure was building. And soon, it would be too much for her to handle. The first crack in Emily's composure came on a Saturday morning. She sat at the breakfast table, stirring her coffee absently while staring out the window. Normally, she'd be scrolling through her phone or chatting about the plans for the day, but this time, she was quiet. Distracted. "You seem off," I said, breaking the silence. Her spoon clinked against the edge of the mug as she stopped stirring. "What?" "Oh, no, I'm fine. Just tired." "Long week?" She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, something like that." I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee and watching her carefully. She looked uneasy. Her fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the edge of the table, and she kept glancing toward her phone as though waiting for a message. If she was waiting for Brad, she'd be disappointed. Rebecca had texted me late the night before. "Brad didn't come home tonight. Staying at a hotel near work. Looks like the company's pushing him out." It didn't surprise me. The Atlanta Journal article had caused a storm. Brad's name was circulating in business circles across Atlanta, and none of it was flattering. Rumors of infidelity and financial misconduct were poison for someone in his position. Rebecca had taken things a step further, sharing the article with several local business groups. Brad's reputation was sinking fast, and Emily had to be feeling the fallout. I could see it in the way she jumped when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening for a moment before she forced a smile. "Just work stuff," she said, putting the phone down quickly. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Yeah, just some emails I need to get to later." The tension in her voice told me everything I needed to know. By Sunday afternoon, she was unraveling. I watched from the garage as she paced the living room, phone in hand, muttering under her breath. Twice, she started to dial a number, only to stop and delete it. When she finally left the house around 3 p.m., I checked the GPS tracker on her car. She was heading toward Brad's apartment. "Perfect," I muttered to myself, grabbing my phone. I called Rebecca. "This is it," I said as soon as she picked up. She didn't need me to explain. "I'll meet you there," she replied. It was a quiet drive across town. I parked a few blocks away from the apartment complex, waiting in the shadows. Rebecca arrived shortly after, pulling up in a sleek black SUV. She stepped out with a calm determination that almost made me laugh. "I told him I'd be stopping by," she said, adjusting her coat. "But I didn't mention you." We approached the building together, Rebecca leading the way. She had the key to the lobby, something Brad had apparently forgotten to change, and we took the elevator to the third floor. Rebecca knocked on the door, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was no sound from inside, and I wondered if Emily and Brad had left. Then, muffled footsteps approached. The door opened, and there he was. Brad froze, his mouth opening slightly as his eyes flicked from Rebecca to me. His confidence, so evident in the videos and photos I'd seen, vanished in an instant. "Rebecca," he stammered. "What are you doing?" She didn't let him finish. "I'm here to talk," she said, her voice cold. "And so is he." She gestured to me. Brad's face turned pale. "Look, I don't think—" "No, you don't think," I interrupted, stepping forward. "But you're about to start listening." For the next 10 minutes, Rebecca and I took turns dismantling Brad's excuses. Rebecca laid into him about the affair, her words sharp and precise. She didn't yell, she didn't need to. Her calm fury cut deeper than any shouting match ever could. When it was my turn, I focused on his arrogance. "You thought you could have it all, didn't you? The career, the family, my wife. Did you really think no one would notice?" Brad's shoulders sagged, his confidence shattered. He tried to defend himself, but his words were weak and unconvincing. Emily stood frozen in the background, her face pale. She didn't say a word, not to me, not to Rebecca. For once, she didn't have a clever excuse or a fake smile to hide behind. When we left the apartment, I felt an odd sense of calm. The confrontation hadn't solved everything, but it was a start. The cracks in their world had turned into full-blown fractures, and there was no going back for either of them. The drive home from Brad's apartment was quiet, but my mind was anything but. Rebecca had been precise, relentless in her confrontation, while I had delivered the crushing blow. Yet, as satisfying as it was to see Brad and Emily crumble, I knew this wasn't the end. The real reckoning was waiting back at home. When I walked through the door, Emily was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. She didn't look up when I came in. The confident, put-together woman I'd known for years was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized, nervous, pale, and completely undone. "Dinner's in the fridge," she muttered, not meeting my eyes. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. She was unraveling, just like Brad. "I think we need to talk," I said finally. Her head snapped up, her wide eyes meeting mine. "About what?" I crossed the room and sat down in the chair opposite her. "About you. About Brad. About everything you've been trying to hide." The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak but nothing came out. "I know," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I've known for weeks." Her hands trembled as she set her phone down on the coffee table. "Jackson, I can explain?" "No, you can't," I interrupted. "Because there's nothing you can say that will change what you did." For the first time in her life, Emily looked completely at a loss for words. The woman who had always been so quick with excuses, so skilled at turning every argument in her favor, was silent. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our entire life together. Everything we built, everything we were, it's all gone because of you." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't stop. "You brought him into our home. You laughed with him, touched him, in the same place where we built a life together. And for what? What was so important, Emily, that you were willing to throw everything away?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed bitterly. "That's what they all say, isn't it? But it happened, didn't it? You made the choice every single time you saw him." The silence between us was suffocating. Finally, she looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "What do you want me to say, Jackson? That I'm sorry? That I hate myself for what I did?" "I do. I know I messed up, but please, don't give up on us." It was almost laughable. She had destroyed everything we had, and now she wanted me to pretend it could all go back to normal. "There is no us, Emily," I said coldly. "Not anymore." The next few days were a blur. I packed my things, one room at a time, leaving behind everything I no longer cared about. Emily tried to talk to me, pleaded, begged, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a second chance. I filed for divorce that Friday. By the following week, I had moved into a small rental on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Brad's fall from grace was swift and brutal. His company terminated him after the investigation concluded he had violated their code of conduct. Rebecca had filed for divorce the same day I did, and rumors about his affair spread like wildfire. His name became a cautionary tale in local business circles. As for Emily, she stayed in the house, alone. I left her the place because I didn't want it anymore. It wasn't home to me, it was just a shell of what we'd once had. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat on the balcony of my new place, sipping coffee and watching the world wake up. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "He's gone. Moved out yesterday. We're free." I smiled for the first time in weeks. We were free. The morning felt different, lighter, maybe. The kind of day that made you feel like something new was just around the corner. I wasn't the kind of man to talk about fresh starts, but if ever there was one, this was it. The paperwork was done. Emily and I were officially no longer married. No more ties, no more shared obligations. Just me, my truck, and the rest of my life ahead. I drove to a small diner I hadn't been to in years, a spot on the outskirts of Atlanta where the coffee was cheap, and the regulars always knew your name. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and Ruth, the waitress who'd been there forever, greeted me with a smile. "Jackson. Been a while." "Yeah," I said, sliding into my usual booth by the window. "Feels like it's been too long." "Coffee, please." "Black." "Coming right up," she said, heading off to the counter. The place hadn't changed much. Same checkered floors, same faded photos of Braves players on the walls. It felt steady, unchanging, in a way my life hadn't been for months. As I waited for my coffee, my phone buzzed on the table. I flipped it over to see a text from Rebecca. "It's official. The divorce is finalized." For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Then I typed back. "Same here. How's it feel?" Her reply came fast. "Surprisingly good. Like closing a door I should have shut a long time ago." I smiled, setting the phone down as Ruth returned with my coffee. "You look like you've had a weight lifted," she said, pouring a fresh cup. "Maybe I have," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. She gave me a knowing look but didn't pry. That was the thing about Ruth, she could read people like a book but never pushed for details. The drive back to my place was quiet. I'd found a small rental on the other side of town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. A fresh coat of paint and a few new pieces of furniture, and it already felt more like home than the house I'd left behind. Emily had stayed in that house, which was fine by me. It held too many memories, most of which I didn't want anymore. Later that evening, I sat out on the balcony, a cold beer in hand, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down to see another message from Rebecca. "Brad moved out today. It's finally over." I stared at the words for a moment before typing back. "Good riddance." Her reply made me chuckle. Amen to that. I leaned back in my chair, letting the cool evening air wash over me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of anger or betrayal pressing down on me. The road ahead was wide open. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to take the first step.